What's going on, guys? My name is Tony, and today I'm going to be talking about a world religions project, in which case we'll be talking about how religion kind of affects my life personally, and sort of the different types of religious things and practices that I see in my daily routine. Some things that you just can't escape for good, mostly. It might talk about some things that might not be the most positive, but for the majority of this, it's going to be positive. So let's get right into it. First, I want to talk about how I play a lot of video games. Especially in the time that we're in right now, because currently it is April of 2020, and if you all know, we're in a self-isolation period due to COVID-19. So with this, watching a lot of different shows and playing a lot of video games, I've noticed one thing for sure, is that God and religion has definitely been a part of those games and shows, or even just simple references in some of the funny shows that I watch, such as The Simpsons. I think God plays a huge role in The Simpsons, especially, even being personified at some points, with Homer making references to, quote-unquote G-Bus, Jesus, but with a B. He's always crying out to G-Bus in a way that, he's expecting him to help Homer in some form of way, but it's always funny how he goes about it. Just different references and jokes within Family Guy, which is another show that is this cartoon but meant for an adult audience. Many of the different references towards some of the things within the Christian Bible, jokes such as being a better father than what Abraham was.
You hear me, Meg? If you come out of this, I am gonna treat you like a princess for the rest of your life. 'Cause I've been a worse father than Abraham.
You wanna tell me what the fuck that was?
So if you don't know anything about world religions, or anything about Christianity, or anything about the history within the Bible, you might not even get that reference, and so that might not exactly be funny. But because I understand it, it's actually funny to me. But I also noticed that, hey, there's a lot of this religion and a lot of the God put into these shows, and it's funny. Now, I will say that I am a non-religious. I don't practice the religion. I don't believe in any of the deities, and I don't partake in any of the traditions or events such as Easter, which we just had last Sunday. I did not celebrate Easter. I don't know if the rest of the world did, if they did or not, due to the isolation, but that is for another day to discuss. So gaming. I mentioned gaming earlier. So one of the things I want to mention is God of War. God of War is a game that has a few different titles that had come out. I think the most recent title had to do with some of the Celtic gods, I believe. I never played that, but I've actually seen a lot of my friends play it and mention it's really good. But basically, it just kind of started out as a game that dealt with Greek gods, and essentially has this character who used to be a soldier, and his family was murdered, and basically takes out revenge on the gods, and basically makes a deal with one of the gods, and he becomes covered in his family's ashes. So that's why he has this pale white skin, and essentially he just goes on a rampage, killing all of the Greek gods. Kind of cool. So a little different from your normal gods in religions that most people still sort of worship today, but gods nevertheless. Like I said, I'm not somebody who believes in gods, but I do find the history of different religions and their deities and how they worship them very interesting, especially those with Greek or those within Buddhism, Hinduism. I won't get into too detailed about Hinduism and Buddhism, the differences in sort of, the deities and the non-deities, but a lot of those references can be found in Simpsons when they're doing different jokes, and they're comical if you understand it. But yeah, as far as God of War goes, that's a really good one. There's even mentions of just God in general, of being the supposed power that is supposed to be almighty, but in video games or in shows, when you have characters who approach a situation or a scenario which seems like within itself it's the situation is so bad that not even quote unquote God himself could save anybody, things like that are supposed to sort of meant to be a sort of, this is worse than the most powerful deity can fix, sort of to give you that gravity of the situation at what's going on. So I do find that inserting things like that into a game or show is actually a good thing, even though I'm not religious, because it shows that the characters who do believe that the situation is more powerful than what what type of God or religion that they worship or partake in, that it's overcoming, this bad is overcoming the good in a sense. So it really gives you that gravity, and I like that in a lot of my video games and different shows and things like that. I think some of the most memorable quotes about God would have to be I think Leonardo DiCaprio in I want to say that it's Blood Diamond. Basically, at the end, when his character is dying, they're in Africa. Basically, he says, if there is a God, then he left Africa a long time ago, to state that basically this is why Africa in this state is decaying, and why there's all this chaos, and why things are happening the way they are, and it's because quote unquote the God really just kind of left, don't care, just kind of left Africa to its own demise.
And I look around and I realize God left this place a long time ago.
Within that movie, within that context, so it just kind of gave you a grave, deeper, sort of macabre kind of feeling as the light kind of left, and now there's only dark, if you will, if you draw those two connections, which seem to be drawn a lot within religions, light and dark. So holidays are something that I don't actually celebrate, but I would say many of them had some sort of story within a holiday. I wouldn't say exactly origin. A lot of these holidays that we have, such as quote unquote Christmas, Easter, and I think a few other ones. But those, what comes to mind is Easter and Christmas for sure, because we think of Easter Bunny, or at least I do, and Christmas Santa Claus. But a lot of other people who are Christians tend to think about as Christmas, being more or less about Jesus' birth and less about Santa Claus, and Easter being Jesus' resurrection day versus some sort of bunny bringing goodies to children. Something that you see driving down the roads, especially here in America, where I would say predominantly the majority of people are either Jewish or Christian. You see a lot of churches with a lot of the crosses that represent. They have different church sessions on Sundays. You tend to hear the bells ring. It's sort of a reminder that there's people in church on Sunday. You see lots of people going, especially on a Sunday here in America, sometimes Wednesday nights, depending on what sect or denomination you are. Some of the music that I tend to listen to, some of my favorite songs actually, I think Ice Cube, It Was a Good Day. It mentions, thanking God and everything like that, and it's kind of like one of those things where even if you're not religious, just saying, oh, thank God, or somebody sneezes, you say, like, bless you, things like that. You talk about heaven and hell, such as, what was it, a couple days ago, it actually snowed here, kind of weird, but people are saying, hell froze over, but, somebody for, like, me who doesn't believe or partake, it's just kind of become a saying, just like any other old saying has become. So that in itself definitely is something that we kind of overlook that happens to be in our lives, or especially mine. Another song would be Talking to God, which is by a band called Hurt, capital H-U-R-T. Basically, he talks about, one lyric is, one of my favorite lyrics, which is, how can you talk to God if you can't talk to me? Basically saying if you can't talk to basically just a mortal, a human, or just me, or at least the artist saying talk to him, then they wonder how can you speak, how can you worship, how can you talk to God, this powerful deity that, is supposed to be, if you can't talk to somebody who isn't all-knowing and powerful, quote-unquote. So that kind of speaks volumes within its own. And like I said, not religious and don't believe, but I think some of the lyrics to other people have a stronger meaning, and I think that's sort of why I kind of like the songs, just for that powerful meaning. So even though I don't believe, it still has a powerful meaning to other people that I know do believe, and I guess that's one of the main points. One of the cool things about video games, so going back to video games, is mentioning of gods. So you have gods that are put into video games or even movies and TV shows that already exist, but there are a lot of other deities that have been created that aren't necessarily deities that one would worship. They're more of just made up deities, just for the sake of having a character that's supposed to be very powerful, and so they sort of refer to them as gods, because gods in our culture kind of are depicted as being the strongest, most knowledgeable, everywhere, all-knowing type beings, if you will, creators and destroyers. So playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, where there's a lot of made-up gods for a lot of different made-up races and characters, those are always interesting. Being able to take a look at those, read through the books, and realize that some of the gods that have been put into those books that these races worship or have some of their similarities within our real gods. So that's definitely a game that I like to play. It's always fun to see that kind of thing. So as far as, poetry, journals, papers, interviews, book reviews, anything like that, I typically don't see any references to God, and I think mostly because a lot of the news that I tend to watch tend to be more secular and not religious. They tend not to refer to God or anything religious specifically. They like to be sort of neutral. So especially when you're talking about different papers and journals, usually papers and journals totally tend to be more or less informative, unless of course you're talking about religion itself, or some sort of people doing something at an event for a church or something like that. That makes sense. However, I don't really read a lot of poetry per se. I guess music is a form of poetry, but straight out poetry I do not. So we mentioned earlier about crosses being seen from the road at churches. That's also something that you can see in a lot of your favorite movies. I think recently what was on TV was Fast and Furious, with a character played by Vin Diesel, who played Dominic Toretto. You notice that he always has the iconic two-piece cross. It's a sterling silver cross with, I think, a few diamonds encrusted on it, and the bottom portion of the cross is on a swivel in the middle, the intersection of the cross. But that's supposed to be something iconic to that character, and it sort of ties his character to the fact that he believes in God, even though he's doing all these crazy things within the movie. He still looks up to, you know, his deity. So knowing that this guy is a man of God and family, and seeing some of the antagonists that he goes against might not be so religious and might not, you know, exactly be about family. That's sort of kind of the conflict that you'd kind of like to see in movies. So it's not to say that he's using religion to overpower his enemies, but he's relying on it to give him strength, which is a positive thing I want to talk about. So one thing that I've been through in my life is homelessness, and I've been through a couple shelters, and one in particular was a hospitality house, and they're pretty close to a Catholic workhouse. But anyway, this hospitality house helped me out through my time. But basically, they're sort of religious. They don't push Christianity onto people, but they do make a lot of references to God, and I guess I'm okay with that. As long as I've always said that religion is fine as long as people don't abuse religion and use it as a means of power to control or destroy people's lives or to manipulate them. I'm okay with that. If the, you know, believing in religion gives you power in getting you through your day, that is acceptable in my book, as long as you're not trying to hurt anybody with it. That brings me to one of my favorite movies, The Book of Eli. Basically, a character played by Denzel Washington, he's blind, and it's the apocalypse, and all books pretty much don't exist. The conflict is that there's a group trying to find a book, the Book of Eli, and Denzel Washington's character has his book, so he carries it with him, but he gets chased by these guys. And basically the main reason why these people who aren't even religious or believe in God want this book is because they believe it holds a power over the people. They want to be able to control the people by telling them what's in the book and then telling them that this almighty being says this, but basically they'd be lying the whole time and basically be using the book for their own power to control the people. Ultimately, in the end, the antagonist does get the book, but not after Denzel Washington's character ultimately reaches his final destination, where he is actually on his deathbed. He happens to be blind. That is the plot twist. He actually recites the entire book to someone who is able to write the entire book down from his memory before he passes away. Meanwhile, the antagonist has the book in his possession, and the woman who happens to be with the antagonist is blind as well. If I didn't mention already, Denzel Washington's character is blind. So the book that he had, the Book of Eli, was actually in Braille, which was interesting. So it held no power or value to the antagonist once the woman was told to open it, and she realized after feeling the pages it was Braille. It was a great conclusion to the movie. But just another example of sort of how religion can be used for power. I could go into talking about Hitler, but yeah, I think just mentioning that, you kind of get the idea already. So, yep. So, talking about my personal life, I had served in the United States Marine Corps for 4 years, deployed to Sangin Helmand, Afghanistan, between the years of 2011 to 2014. I was there twice. God had not necessarily played a role, but definitely was present, not physically. But I mean, the other Marines around me had their own religions, and they tend to pray to God, and that was something that I had saw but it was also something logistical, believe it or not. So you sign a lot of wills, you do a lot of power of attorneys, and you end up getting your dog tags and all your information. But there's always one thing when you're talking about war that you do have to think about, and that's death. And upon your death, what shall happen not only to your stuff but to you. You can basically choose what religion, as long as it's an actual recognized religion. But having to make that choice, I guess, to think about how you're going to be buried and what services are provided by what sect or denomination of religion you belong to, was something that we had to do. I personally put no preference, as I didn't really care. I guess for me, I didn't believe in an afterlife. I didn't believe in going to a heaven or hell. And I didn't believe in any sort of place, after death. I just kind of figured if I was dead, I didn't really have a say in the matter anyway, because I, at that point didn't exist. I wouldn't exist. I would just kind of just be dead, and that's it. So yeah. What are your guys' thoughts? What are your guys' experiences? Leave a comment down in the section below. Thank you guys for watching. This has been a world religions bridge project of mine that I'm doing for a class, and I hope you guys all the best, and see ya.